Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the part of the lesson that has us looking at decolonization. Before we get started, please let me encourage you to open up to the correct part for today's lesson and to fill in any key content that happens to appear throughout the notes section. Remember that when you're finished, you may proceed to the next part of the lesson accordingly. So let's go and get started, and please remember to follow along as closely as you can. In the 1950s and 1960s, African colonies experienced decolonization and gained independence. The first sub-Saharan African colony to gain its independence was Ghana in 1957. The reason why decolonization as a movement happens here in world history is because after World War II, many European countries that once sought dominance around the world began to weaken their control because they had other pressing issues at home. As an imperial power, Britain conquered much of Africa, including the Gold Coast, and after World War II, Britain allowed Africans in Gold Coast to participate in local self-governments. This was deemed to be a controversial move at the time. However, the need for independence became to different African nations at different times for different reasons. Now, starting in 1947, Kwame Nkrumah used Gandhi's nonviolent strategy of boycotts and strikes to pressure Britain to grant total independence. To many Africans, especially in Ghana, he was deemed to be a hero. After a decade of struggle, Britain granted the Gold Coast independence in 1957 and the nation was renamed Ghana. In fact, here's Kwame Nkrumah right here. Kwame Nkrumah was elected president for life and began an ambitious series of construction projects, education, and health programs. For many people in Ghana, these types of programs have been lacking under European colonial rule for years. Nkrumah supported Pan-Africanism as well, which is unity among all Africans, and he hoped to create a United States of Africa, which would make the entire continent of Africa into one single nation. Although this never came to full fruition, the theories and thoughts and sentiments of Pan-Africanism are still alive and well today. In 1966, Nkrumah was overthrown because his various projects were just too expensive and hurt the economy. Also, his people thought he spent too much time promoting Pan-Africanism. Ghana struggled between military and civilian rule until free elections were finally held in the year 2000. Unlike Ghana, demands for independence in South Africa were led by descendants of white colonists, and in many ways, different types of colonial independence movements happened for different reasons at different times in different countries. When South Africa gained independence in 1931, white Afrikaners gained power and created a policy of apartheid. Apartheid, when translated, means separateness. Here's a sign of an example of what apartheid looked like in South Africa. If this looks familiar, many people connotate this to the civil rights movement and struggle in the 1960s and 1950s America. Apartheid laws created strict racial segregation, which is total separation of races between blacks and whites in South Africa. In many ways, the reason why this was done was to keep the black race inferior to that of the white colonial race. And black South Africans protested apartheid and violent riots often broke out. In fact, in one violent event called the Sharpeville Massacre, many people were actually killed. In the 1980s, many foreign nations refused to trade with South Africa in protest of their apartheid system that they had in place. The anti-apartheid leader was Nelson Mandela, which is a name that you might have heard of before. Nelson Mandela is deemed to be an icon of civil rights and social justice in South Africa and around the world. In 1964, Mandela was arrested and given a life sentence for opposing apartheid laws. When he was in prison, he had many visitors come to him, and additionally, he was still an influential leader when he was behind bars. In 1990, new South African President F.W. de Klerk released Mandela from prison. This set the stage for Mandela to become more than just a former prisoner. South African Parliament repealed all apartheid laws and announced the first multiracial election in 1994. In fact, here's a picture of the first line for voters in South Africa voting for Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela won the election and became South Africa's first black president. Many people hail this as an accomplishment for what decolonization and independence movements can do. South Africans adopted a new constitution with the Bill of Rights that guaranteed equal rights for all citizens. Not all African independence movements were like South Africa and ended with democracy or without bloodshed. In fact, it's safe to say that many other countries struggled more with decolonization. For example, after gaining independence, Nigeria erupted in an ethnic civil war, where the loss of life is still not yet known by statistics and data. In the Congo, a series of civil wars weakened the newly formed nation. As you're going to learn later in this lesson, the fighting in the Congo never essentially stopped. Ethnic division weakened Kenya's government and led to violence and rule by dictators. That's one common theme you might find across most African countries too: corrupt leaders and independence movements. Among the worst examples of violence in Africa is the genocide, or mass killings, in Rwanda and Sudan. These two events represent systematic mass killings of ethnic minorities in these particular countries. For example, in Rwanda, ethnic conflict between rival clans led to the Hutus massacring between 500,000 to 800,000 Tutsis in 1994. The Rwandan genocide to this date is one of the most controversial and consequential events in world history. Here are some pictures that show the atrocities. In Darfur in Sudan, the Sudanese government killed up to 400,000 Muslims in an attempt to destroy an anti-government rebel movement. The Janjaweed are one of the terrorist organizations that was over there that unleashed havoc against the Sudanese population. So as you guys can see, genocides in the latter part of the 20th century came in other different countries as well, not just in Africa. Many people would say that this is part of the systematic movement of independence. UN peacekeeping interventions in 1945 to 2009 are many, although the UN, should be noted here, sometimes is deemed to be rather feckless and weak in their handling. Although civil wars and genocides define much of Africa's history, this map here shows us just how many countries struggled with this type of event. As can be seen, most of the civil wars and genocides of the world take place in the poorest countries. Africa is where much of this violence does in fact happen. The challenges in Africa today are many. In fact, to be clear, many different African countries struggle with overcoming problems with AIDS, extreme poverty, and warfare, and these remain the biggest challenges Africa faces today. Only time will tell how Africa deals with the growing implications of decolonization and independence in years to come. Thank you very much for tuning in, and remember to complete the rest of your lesson accordingly.